Salofalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up.
So I think it's been used to try and sway people to join government.
A Solomon Islands MP accuses China of manipulating the country with aid money. Also,
tribal fights and access to land really compounds the difficulties.
Survivors of the PNG landslide are still seeking a place to call home, and Fiji aims to better address the impacts of climate change through its schools. An independent member of parliament and the head of Transparency Solomon Islands claim China is deliberately manipulating the country with aid money. But the Solomon Islands Prime Minister, Jeremiah Manele, says that's not true. Caleb Fotheringham is in Honiara.
Independent MP Peter Kenny-Lauria Jr. says China, through its new aid initiative, the Rural Sustainable Development Programme, is driving opposition members of parliament to back the pro-China government. Mr. Kenny-Lauria believes the fund is subject to abuse because instead of MPs deciding where the money goes, it's up to the Ministry of Rural Development and China. He says this has resulted in many in opposition not receiving a cent of the aid money.
For me, it's just more discretionary, and by discretionary it means political. So I think it's been used to try and sway people to join government from the opposition and even independent, as I'm now the leader of the independent group in Parliament myself.
Visiting a cocoa farm yesterday with New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters, Mr. Kenny-Lauria said he thought both China and his government were behind the manipulation of MPs.
This group is the government now, is the same government pretty much, which was the same government that went into relations, diplomatic relations with China. So I think in terms of China's foothold, they would like those that are like-minded, to still be in government.
Chief Executive Officer of Transparency Solomon Islands, Ruth Lilongula, agrees the aid program is driving members of parliament to abandon the political party banner or independent status which they campaigned under in the April election. She says the program's application process is murky, but it involves MPs applying through the Chinese embassy.
I think here in Solomon Islands we should treat every donor the same. This does not happen. We should ask them the same question. It happens to other donors and other people, but it does not happen to China.
Solomon Islands Prime Minister Jeremiah Manele rubbished Mr. Kenny-Lauria's claim.
Anywhere in the world, after the elections, you will tend to find members of parliament who would like to join, would like to be in the government side. Because once they're in the government side, then they'll be in a position to influence policy and the budget.
Meanwhile, Winston Peters, who's in the middle of his Pacific tour, is in no mood to discuss the superpower.
We've stuck to the matter of our ability to be a sound, worthy, good partner in the Pacific and focused on that alone.
RNZ Pacific reached out to China's embassy in Solomon Islands but did not get a response.
2 months after the side of a mountain gave way in Yambali village in Papua New Guinea's Inga province, survivors are still yet to find somewhere permanent to restart their lives. Thousands who were displaced are being cared for in neighbouring villages or in tents provided by aid agencies. The PNG Country Director of aid agency Care International, Justine McMahon, says finding land people can relocate to and call their own is not a simple exercise. Don Wiseman spoke with Ms. McMahon, who told him that 2 months on, the disaster zone remains chaotic and confused.
Largely because of the evacuation order, which was entirely reasonable and justified, but the authorities are still trying to locate land to move people to. So it's quite a difficult situation. And the complexities of living in that part of the world, in the Upper Highlands, with the tensions around existing tribal fights and access to land, really compounds the difficulties.
In terms of the order for people to relocate, did government not make any effort to locate a site for them to go to, or sites?
They have, but land in Melanesia generally, but particularly in the Upper Highlands of PNG, is highly prized and a very sensitive issue to negotiate. So I would anticipate that it would take quite a while for the authorities to negotiate access to land. Having said that, they are clearing land close to the landslide in a place where it's safe for people, but that takes quite a while as well. So there are lots of dynamics going on.
Hopefully they're not locating people under a potentially unstable mountain somewhere else.
What they're doing at the moment is they're moving it to the area where the school is, and it's quite flat, but they still need to clear some of the land for the people to move to. One of the other difficulties is, as I mentioned, the existing tribal tensions, is that people are hesitant to move to another area where they don't feel safe. So it's quite difficult for the authorities to negotiate.
Well, Care International has been involved previously in Inga, working on the tribal warfare. What sort of progress has been made?
Well, we were making very good progress, Don, but I think in the lead up to the 2022 general election, when there was significant violence in the province, it became unsafe for us to work there. Earlier this year, there's a lot of terrible violence in the province. So it just wasn't safe for us to have people in the area. So we do still have the good relationships and the connections on the ground, and we're really utilising those networks to implement humanitarian relief projects now.
Now, we hear that there are tens of thousands of people. I think a figure of 70,000 was mentioned, of people going without food because the food gardens have been destroyed by the excess rain and the roads blocked.
Yes, the Defence Force have been working tirelessly for several weeks to put in an alternate road, and I think they're making a lot of progress. Still might be a couple of weeks. In regard to the figures, the way that the figures are being looked at, I think that there's a bit of confusion around those figures, both those directly impacted by the landslide, but those who may be affected by food shortages.
Just down the road, of course, is the huge Porgera mine, which only got back up and running again a couple of months ago. Is it back in action? What's happening there?
They're doing what they can, but they're also blocked off. So I believe that they are assisting in terms of the provision of earth-moving equipment, particularly to help the Defence Force build the new road. But yeah, they're also on the other side of the landslide, so it's not an easy situation for them too. And given, the dynamics around the mine that were pre-existing, there's a lot of sensitivity in the whole area.
Care International, you've talked about the impact of polygamy in Inga province, where it's a significant practice, and how this impacts or can impact when you're distributing aid. Some families get it, some don't.
The registration was very important, and the authorities did that quickly and to the best of their ability. But I think as time wore on, what became evident is that initially registration was only looking at single-headed household. So, as an example, the first wife may be included in the registration, but the other households, the second, third, fourth wife, were not always included. And so there was a real disparity in the distribution of relief. Very often it would be one wife and the husband would be able to access the relief. The others were not on the list, and their children. So there were cases when they were left out. However, big credit to the authorities is that they recognised that that was an oversight, and that is now being addressed.
How many people is your organisation helping?
We're working in the care centres, Don. We're working also in some of the host communities. The figures, well, we know the people in the areas. It's quite hard to work out those directly affected or those who are impacted in some way. But certainly we're working in the care centre locations, and we will be working also in the host communities. So several thousand people.
Is there enough accommodation in neighbouring villages for these displaced people, or are some of them in tents?
Some of them are in tents that have been donated by the international community, and that's very welcome. Others are living in host communities. But again, the complexities of people living in that area, they're displaced from their own land. They're visitors in these communities now. So they're very much disempowered, but it also has a burden on the host communities as well.
We're 2 months into the aftermath of this disaster now, but it's going to be affecting people for a long, long time, isn't it?
Definitely, it will. I think as we talked about earlier, the issue of negotiating land for people to move to, I imagine that will take quite a long time given the sensitivities. So in the meantime, what happens to those people directly affected? They're either in the host communities, and as we go on, there's the possibility of increased tension simply because there is that additional burden on the host communities. People are disempowered. But the other issue too is just the lack of an ability to begin the recovery process. So, it's a very, very sad situation.
Protecting school children from climate change was the main focus of a 2-day consultation in Fiji this week. Facilitated by Save the Children, participants from around the region came together to discuss the way forward addressing climate resilience in education systems. Over the past decade, natural disasters have caused disruptions to the education landscape. Regional Safe Schools lead, John Lilo, says Tropical Cyclone Harold in 2020 damaged hundreds of schools, affecting thousands of students. He told Tiana Haxton that this disaster has emphasised the crucial need for climate adaptation in schools.
The purpose of the workshop is actually to advance the collective efforts of the Pacific governments and education authorities, regional partners, in enhancing school safety and climate resilience within the education sector. By bringing together key stakeholders, the workshop aims to facilitate an assessment of current challenges, share best practices, and develop actionable strategies to ensure the safety and well-being of students across the Pacific region in the face of environmental and societal hazards. We were able to share and discuss knowledge and experiences around school safety in the education sector and approaches, tools that the governments themselves are currently using. So it was a good learning experience for each of them as well, because they get to learn from each other.
You mentioned in coming together you were able to identify some of the hazards and risks and whatnot faced by children around the Pacific and ways forward to address these challenges. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what some of the things that were discussed?
As we know, in the region, the Pacific region is one of the vulnerable regions in the world. There are a lot of impacts of various natural and human-induced hazards. The Pacific continues to face ongoing threats in terms of climate change, especially, for example, tropical cyclone. It's very common across the Pacific. It's one of the most common hazards that's affecting the Pacific, but also the education sector. For example, in 2020, tropical cyclone Harold wreaked havoc across the Pacific, causing significant damages to schools and affecting thousands of students, disrupting their learning. So, that has been some of the examples around how it has affected children and their learning in the Pacific region.
I hear discussions continue on today to workshop some of the ways forward and some of the solutions to these challenges. Could you tell us a little bit about what's already been discussed so far, or what you expect to hear over the next day worth of discussions?
I think one of the things that will be discussed and will continue to be happening is that we need to look at some of the priorities that we want to work together to support the Ministries of Education to move forward the work that we are doing in school safety and climate resilience. And one of the important things that have already resonated among the discussions with our stakeholders is coordination and partnership to work within existing regional initiatives such as the Pacific Regional Education Framework Program, to use those initiatives to support the work around school safety and climate resilience. Things things like climate finance is also at the top of our stakeholders around supporting resourcing and making sure that our stakeholders and partners have the capacity to continue implementing school safety in the region.
You mentioned using climate financing. So do you think governments across the Pacific should ensure a percentage of their climate financing, climate adaptation funds should be focused towards schools and children?
Yeah, and I think to re-emphasize, because that has come up a lot in the discussions, is the coordination and partnership, because of course we can continue to support the governments with funding, but there are a lot of things that are needed in terms of ensuring a holistic approach is being implemented to ensure the safety and well-being of children. So it means that we have to work together with different partners at the table to ensure that we can ensure a comprehensive approach to ensuring the safety and well-being of children in the region.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.